Chinese, Russian and Iranian warships are converging on South Africa for a week of naval drills, barely a week after Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro was captured and taken to the US to face charges. Venezuela relies on Chinese and Russian-made weapons. Why did they fail Maduro so completely? And with the element of total surprise and zero loss of American lives and weapon systems, what were the secrets to US success? Did this operation send shockwaves through Zongnanhai and the Kremlin alike, or has it simply hardened their resolve? And does this place Taiwan, which buys American-made arms, in a stronger position? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Khvat. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Tony Hu, former US Department of Defense Senior Director for China, Taiwan and Mongolia, Guermantes Lailari, retired US Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, and finally, Kitsch Liao, Atlantic Council's Global China Hub Associate Director. Tony, Guermantes, Kitsch, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so Tony, let me start with you first. Before we get into Venezuela, let's talk about these drills for the BRICS Plus. China's Defense Ministry described them as this: joint operations to safeguard vital shipping lanes and economic activities. Of course, they've also dubbed them, these drills, Will for Peace. What do you make of the timing and also what they actually mean for China?
I suspect this timing was pre-planned already. This type of things doesn't happen in a week or two. So most likely the timing was more coincidental. But certainly both sides, all the country will highlight, especially Iranian, and probably the Chinese also, the fact that, hey, we got all this country with us. Right. But does it mean something? I'm not sure. Now, this is rare footage from the early hours of January 4th, showing a US RQ-170 Sentinel stealth drone returning to Puerto Rico, some saying from Venezuela after supporting the US strikes on January 3rd. Intelligence gathering was fundamental to the US attack. Here was another element. Watch.
All Venezuelan military capacities were rendered powerless as the men and women of our military, working with U.S. law enforcement, successfully captured Maduro in the dead of night. It was dark. The lights of Caracas were largely turned off due to a certain expertise that we have. It was dark and it was deadly.
G-Man, so firstly, how remarkable was this blackout and how was it achieved?
There could have been several ways it was done. Cyber could be part of it, all of it, or none of it. The other part, the none of it part, are the Blue 114B bombs, which are carbon fiber wire canisters reportedly used in this event. And what it does is, when it blows up, it sends out a lot of very, very, very fine metal all over, let's say, a certain area. And that area, if it has any electrical devices on it, causes those electric devices to basically be incapacitated temporarily. That's the unique thing about this weapon, is that it doesn't cause permanent damage. And after a few days, it can be fixed. And so this kind of weapon is useful when you don't want to destroy a country's electrical grid, blowing it up, for example, but you want them to be able to recover. So that's the unique thing about this weapon. And it was also used in Desert Storm in 1991, and also an Allied force against Serbia in 1999.
I take it that this is a non-lethal weapon. What do you think it said about the way that the US, approached this operation?
The Joint Seed Handbook would refer to this something as concurrent localized suppression to basically support an extraction operation. You basically suppress enemy communications, you disrupt their radars, you could do stand-in or stand-off jamming of all these electronic equipment. We talked about cyber. One of the ways they could use this is literally to have a plane fly over and hack into your antenna. These effects are all temporary. They don't cause much, casualties, which is consistent with what this operation is about.
Tony, just moving back to that Sentinel, the 170 Sentinel drone, there are some people who are saying that they believe that it was part of the operation, and others sort of questioning whether such a high-tech, sort of stealthy drone was needed. What's your view?
I think it provided real-time intelligence, providing EO/IR images, and I heard you also have synthetic aperture radar, so even in all weather, it can provide images. Because for our president to make a decision on what to do, when to do, he needs real-time intelligence. So I suspect RQ-170 was there. Our special forces probably infiltrated beforehand and was reporting the condition right on the ground, and that report allowed the president to say, now is the time, let's go in. So I think RQ-170 was involved providing that real-time intelligence.
Okay, and G-Man, just looking at the broader picture first before we drill down to specific weapon systems, what do you think was the main reason for the success of the U.S.?
Well, I would go back to Colin Powell's doctrine, which says he has 5 or 6 main concepts. First is, the U.S. should not do anything unless it has to do with vital national interests, clear objectives, using overwhelming force, a legal justification or some kind of support from the public, and a defined exit strategy. All these things combined were able to help focus the mission and the success, because all these doctrinal concepts help make the mission clear, concise, and predictable. And just adding to what Tony said about intelligence, intelligence is very broad, and the RQ-170 does part of it. There are satellites, there are people on the ground, there are ships at sea. So there's lots of different things happening simultaneously, and they're all fused together to create a picture so that the commander, the Joint Task Force commander, can make decisions tactically and operationally.
So are you saying that it's the U.S. Doctrine that was the main reason for success? I mean,
yes. Yes.
Above intelligence, above weapon systems?
Yes, because the whole product, the result, is about integrating and having the right mindset and having a clear mission objective. All those things combined make the mission very clear. Now, it doesn't always work, but for example, the legal justifications were all there months before. And actually, even before President Trump showed up, Biden also had a bounty on the head of Maduro for $25 million. So all these things add up to making a crystal clear objective and achieving it. Superior intelligence, what we talked about, excellent leadership, and rehearsals and trainings. All these things make it more successful.
Right, everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet as well. Kitsch, now turning to the weapon systems themselves, among the diverse systems that US used, which ones played decisive roles in the outcome? Let's take a look at some of them. There's an EA-18G Growler jet equipped with ALQ-99 tactical jamming systems, which can disable enemy radar and communication targets. The 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment's MH-60M Black Hawks. They have advanced missile and radar warning sensors, as well as infrared countermeasures that can blind or confuse incoming missiles. We mentioned the Sentinel, and also AGM-88 HARM, anti-radiation missiles used to destroy radar systems. Kitsch, if I can come to you, if we were just looking at these weapon systems, which ones do you think were decisive?
So these are not the entire catalog of systems, right? And as Chairman King pointed out, it's layered effects, one after another. And this has to happen within a very short amount of time. For example, the A-18 are capable of doing stand-in, stand-off, electronic warfare, jamming. But the thing is, it's still limited, right? But I would say, one of the most daring part and probably the most risky part of this operation is the insertion of special forces into the zone. Because, yes, I can disable the entire missile system. I can disable your radars. But, I can turn off the lights. The U.S. Special Forces, U.S. operation generally owns the night, especially against an opponent like Venezuela. But when you start flying in, you're still encountering AAAs, right? Ground fire. You still encounter infantry with manpads, with missiles. You can't avoid all of this. And at that point, you're basically we talk about survivability onions, starting from the outside. Don't be seen. Don't be known. When they fly in, you already get into the point where don't get hit because they saw you already. And fortunately, they were able to avoid the last part. Yes, you're hit, but don't be dead. So that's so I think that's where it is.
Okay, Tony. I mean, the nickname for this aviation regiment was the Night Stalkers.
Yep.
Again, how amazing is it that not one single death on the U.S. side?
Well, it's not achieved by just them, obviously. We have a suppression of enemy air defenses in there. We had F-35s from Vermont National Guard trained for the sea mission, which indicates they're the first unit that's taken over from the F-16s, this specific mission. And so they did go in, and also we have people on the ground that's been monitoring those defense systems. Their job is not to attack them, just report them. So we knew where to hit them. So basically open the channel for our aircraft going. At that point, as Kitsch said, only those people who can visually see it can attack them. And of course, these guys, they're trained at night. That's all they do. The special operation aviation regiment, that's their job. And they have been successful in most missions. So it's a combination of many things that allow them to get in there with minimum casualty and get out. It's not just their training, but they have a whole bunch of support that allow them to accomplish the mission.
Kitsch, how do you think China and Russia are reacting to this? I mean, does it move the needle for Russia and for China?
So there are three ways to look at this, right? Publicly speaking, yes, you saw your system defeated on TV, even though it might not be the system's fault. So there's a public relation damage there. But if we look closer, China is going to send their military attachés to different countries operating their system and examine the entire operation, talk to them about what you should and should not do. For example, Venezuela probably shouldn't be trying to defend their entire airspace, right? Considering their capability, their posture should probably be asymmetric, trying to cause as much damage to the U.S. without trying to guard your entire airspace, right? But for China, right, especially for China, I don't think they're too worried, because they've been building their own integrated air defense system since the embassy bombing back in 1999. And they have a lot of exotic systems that other countries do not have access to. For example, passive receiver radars, multi-static ones, that could, turn your 5G, 4G stations into radar waves they could use to pinpoint aircraft around Taiwan, around the Taiwan Strait. These are not capabilities that countries they sell the system to have access to.
Is the message, or is the conclusion that China and Russia are getting from this simply that they cannot replicate what the U.S. did?
I think they got a rude awakening on the magnitude of our capability, our multi-domain capability, and how we can synchronize an operation such as this with almost 200 aircraft and timing it where each complement each other. So this is a graduate level mission planning and war planning that I'm not sure they can do. But then this doesn't just come in a day. It's through many months and years of exercise, many years of lessons learned from various exercise, and our ability to execute this type of mission, mainly because also people, we train our people to be able to respond to changes and to overcome unexpected things. These are all part of the reason for the success. And once again, it takes years to develop.
Right. And Guermantes, you've spoken about this before in a previous show. You said, China can copy, can steal hardware, but it cannot replicate institutional mindset.
Right.
Yeah. Do you think that this went further, this entire operation, in terms of the impact on Russia and China? Does it undercut China's propaganda that the East is rising and the West is falling?
Well, as you mentioned in your question earlier, they've been very quiet about it. And communists and authoritarian regimes don't talk about their inability to do something, or their failures, or their mistakes.
So it was completely indefensible, was it, the performance of these weapons?
Yes, it was like a plus performance. Not just the weapons, but the people and the systems and how everything worked. I mean, it's going to be studied for a long time, and China and Russia are obviously studying this operation.
In a recent New York Times article, Trump was asked whether Venezuela had set up a precedent for China to attack Taiwan. Trump firstly rejected any comparison, saying Taiwan wasn't a real threat to China, like Venezuela was to the US. When pushed by the reporter saying she believed Taiwan was a separatist threat, Trump replied, "That's up to him, what he's going to be doing. But, you know, I've expressed to him that I would be very unhappy if he did that, and I don't think he'll do that. I hope he doesn't." Kitsch, reading those words or hearing those words, how do you read this? Some have read that as Trump abandoning Taiwan.
I don't believe those words mean like Trump is abandoning Taiwan, right? Especially considering we have the NSS, where there are very strong languages, even stronger than TRA. We have languages talking about the U.S. have to keep the capability to intervene so as not to be forced into a position where they have no choice but to abandon Taiwan. Now, that's as clear as you can get. I don't think that's what it means.
Tony, it seems, I mean, in terms of if you actually look at the words, Trump said, when he said it's up to him, he didn't say Taiwan was up to him, to Xi Jinping. He said what Xi Jinping does is up to Xi Jinping. There's a distinction there.
Right. And he didn't clearly talk about U.S. response, but once again, as Kitsch said, if you look at our national security strategy, where we said we want to maintain a overmatch to deter China, or if deterrence fails, we're going to defeat them. So I think that's a clear signal if you look at national security strategy, because that is what United States view as our national security issues.
And if the president authorizes the U.S. to help defend Taiwan, if there is an attack from China, what do you think from the U.S. actions in Venezuela scare China the most?
I think, once again, our multi-domain warfare capabilities scares them the most, because we can come at them from different aspects, and the way we can execute in such precision and with such large force, of course the force will be much larger. Also, we will have a coalition versus just United States acting alone. I think those are all issues that might worry China and keep Xi Jinping up at night.
Okay. Kitsch, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, just a two-finger. So Venezuela, just as we talked about earlier, U.S. have different levels of plans, have comp plans, have operational plans, or concept plans. For Taiwan contingency, we know, like, you know, they have an old plan. Taiwan's old plan has been in place and continuously updated since at least 2000s. So, you know, that's one of the things that people have to be aware of.
So, G-Man, you have drawn a comparison between the situation of long-range missiles from Russia in Venezuela with the 1962 Cuban crisis. How?
So I mentioned General Powell's doctrine. The first thing is vital national interest. There is no vital national interest for removing Maduro unless he has missiles that can reach the United States. That makes it a vital interest. And so in October, Maduro sent a letter to Putin. Putin and his people responded that they would be willing to send him these kinds of missiles that threaten the United States. And that's the main reason, in my opinion, the United States went in and took him out of the equation and continue to be around Venezuela to prevent those missiles from arriving from Russia.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Kitsch, going to you, let's talk into some detail about the Chinese and Russian system failures. Here are some that Venezuela was potentially using that night. There was a Chinese anti-stealth JY-27A mobile long-range air surveillance and guidance radar, which China said was resistant to jamming and able to detect F-22 and F-35 fighters. There was also that Chinese HQ-9, HQ-12 long-range surface-to-air missiles and Chinese command and control systems. On the Russian side, there were the S-300VM surface-to-air anti-ballistic missiles, the BUK M2E self-propelled medium-range surface-to-air system, and Sukhoi Su-30 Mk2V fourth-generation multi-role fighter. So, how do you assess the overall performance? Let's focus on Chinese-made weaponry in the real world versus their propaganda.
So one of the things we have to clear first is what does detect stealth aircraft means, right? The GIL-27 is a VHF frequency radar. It's relatively long in terms of wavelength, And what that means is they have very poor range resolution and angular resolution. So what that means is I can see a bomber flying over 300 kilometers away, but I know it's within the range of, let's say, 2 to 5 kilometers here. And, considering taking into account integration time, computer calculation, and all that, by the time the air defense commander in the region understand, oh, there's a bomber flying over, the bomber's no longer there. It was there 5-10 minutes ago. You have to hand this over to something else.
Right.
And so, that's not very accurate,
Okay.
right? Clearly, they do not actually have the command and control system to basically funnel the information into systems that are capable of targeting U.S. radar or U.S. planes, and then vector, the Venezuelan fighters to take off.
Okay.
So these are all very important, very significant deficiencies in their command and control that is not easy to observe without an insider information, essentially.
And Tony, what does that mean in any Taiwan contingency? I mean, does it mean that these weapons are failures?
Well, first of all, Taiwan system, of course, is a lot better than Venezuela's. And as far as I know, Taiwan doesn't intend to strike China with the aircraft. They might do it with missiles and cruise missiles, but not in the sense that the United States went into Venezuela. So is there a direct correlation?
But does it make China vulnerable to any U.S. action on China
it does.
itself?
If China initiates aggression and the regional allies come together and decide to strike on China, this does indicate there might be a weakness because similar system, the S-300s, for example, was in Iran. So these are the same system that failed to protect Iran and Venezuela. And I think at this point, China probably going back to understand why. What was the failure? And so that they want to fix this.
Right. G-Man?
Another aspect of this is, just like most countries, China's weapon sales, the weapons they sell are not the same as the ones they have in their country. So they're degraded a bit. And so the question is how much degraded are they compared to their original ones defending China? The other aspect, too, of China is that it doesn't export everything. So like the DF-21s and DF-27s that only China has, for example, push out the U.S. Navy way far away from the first island chain, which Venezuela didn't have. So there are some actual weapon systems differences between Venezuela and China, which is a lot more challenging. Although they did have a Russian weapons that could reach out 100 or 200 kilometers, but the Chinese systems go out to 1,000 to 2,000 kilometers.
I mean, how about things like the fact that missiles need guidance? Is this the kind of weakness that we might be able to see for China?
Against China? So in the case of the PL-15E, which was used in India, Pakistan, that weapon was successful in knocking down a couple of Indian aircraft, but it only had supposedly had a reported rate of 60% hit, and the other 40% continued flying, and then they landed on the ground and intact. And so now the adversary, in the case of Pakistan, India is looking at these weapons and probably providing that information to the U.S. about the air-to-air missiles. And so each time there's a conflict, there's an exposure of your weapon system to the adversary, and they will collect information and then make their weapon systems better to counter. So it's a whole dynamic process.
Yeah. So are we seeing there, Kitsch, that short term they are deterred because they can see that there's a capability gap, but long term it could, boost their innovation or competitiveness vis-a-vis the U.S.?
So one of the things we have to understand is, as we talked about earlier, the most important part is the command and control, the linkage, the handover, right? I see things, I have to hand over to the things that can shoot it. As we understand now, the People's Liberation Army, different branches of it, the Army, Navy, 2nd Artillery, now the Rocket Force, their information system, right, their data system are not integrated yet. But they are attempting to do that. This is the entire point of joint operations. And they want to also integrate that with space-based assets, right? Like air and space-based air targets, moving target indication from space. Of course, their weaknesses is, as usual, in integration, making everything work together.
And possibly their own political system. Tony, I want to give you the final words in terms of implications for a Taiwan contingency.
Right now, Xi Jinping has removed a bunch of those generals, including those that came up with him, and because I suspect he's really worried about military capability against him. So he has very few true professionals. You know, the Second Artillery, the rocket force, is commanded right now by a Navy admiral, and does he know the employment doctrine of a rocket force, when to use it, because rocket force is a support force. Okay, so in and by itself, it's not going to achieve victory. So when do you use it? How do you use it? Those systems. So a lot of these concepts, I suspect, many of the generals that's in charge now does not understand fully. So they have that weakness. So in addition to the command and control interoperability, the connection between the different systems, there is a command problem, I believe, where the leadership might not be able to effectively use everything all the tools he has. And that, I suspect, is another weakness that might take years to resolve.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap it up there. I'm sorry, we've run out of time. Thank you, Tony Hu, Guermantes Lailari, and Kitsch Liao for joining us. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.